All right, and the next section we're going to talk about here is constitutional governance. A constitution is a governing document that spells out all the rights, responsibilities, and rules that the government has on it. Um, and it's not enough just for a government to have a constitution to be considered a constitutional government. But they also have to follow the rules of the Constitution. And what a Constitution usually does is it limits the power of the government, right? It says there are certain things you can't do. So there, for example, you can't just arrest someone for no reasons, right? Which is something that used to happen to people all the time, hundreds of years ago in Europe when these ideas were being bantered about. Um, so constitutional government puts rules which are oftentimes limitations on governments, which then in turn guarantees people certain rights. And the government has to follow the Constitution in order for it to be considered a constitution. Now, the United States has the world's oldest written constitution that has lasted, written in 1787, 88, I believe it was approved in 1789. Except for maybe San Marino, which is this teeny little speck of a city in the middle of Italy, which is actually its own country. And let's focus on again our constitution. The city-state of Florence had a constitution in the 1300s. Um, each state had a constitution before we were even a country. So although we may have the longest lasting or standing constitution, the idea of constitutions was not our idea. A lot of these ideas came from Europe in the 1700s, even the late 1600s. And you can see that our states had constitutions going back to the 1600s. A city in Italy had a constitution in the 1300s, the city of Florence. California, of course, has its own constitution as well. Um, and then it mentions, that sometimes there are norms, right? That the Constitution is not the only thing that governs a country, but that sometimes there are things called norms. Like, for example, normally presidents only used to serve 2 terms. But when Franklin Roosevelt went for a third, he wasn't breaking any rules. He was just breaking norms. And then they put rules and limitations on how many terms a president could be elected. But even to this day, there are norms that certain expectations of government that aren't written into the Constitution um, that our government generally is expected to follow. And if they don't follow, um, they aren't breaking the Constitution, but everyone knows that you really shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. Um, also, we have laws, right? Britain has a government that's been around for a very long time and is based on laws and court decisions versus an actual written constitution. So we have laws that aren't in the Constitution that sometimes the government has to follow. Off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of one here. Something that's in the Constitution that is generally not, that is a rule that the government has to follow. I don't know. There was a campaign finance law that was passed, but then was struck down. But for a few years, maybe the Hatch Act. I'm not exactly sure what would be a good example of that.